Tonight is a quiet walk across open ground. Wind moves through the Windward Plains like something alive, combing the grass flat, lifting grit from the dunes, and carrying scents farther than they have any right to travel. In a place this exposed, most creatures survive by staying small, staying quick, or staying hidden. But some survive by being impossible to ignore, by their mass and the simple fact that the world has to go around them. Somewhere out in the plains, near the river's edge or the shade of a low ridge, a bulky amphibian shifts its weight, blinks slowly, and tastes the air with the tip of its tongue. And if you are a cloud of insects hovering too low, or a curious hunter standing too close, it will decide, in a plain and unbothered way, that you are food or trouble, or both. This is the story of Chatacabra. The people of Kunafa do not need the guild's names for it. To them, it is simply the giant toad. Out here, names are often less about taxonomy and more about warning. A creature that looks almost slow until you notice how much ground it covers in a day, how wide its wandering circles are, and how little it seems to care that the plains are meant to be dangerous. Chatacabra is an amphibian, but not the sleek, narrow-bodied kind you might imagine when you hear that word. Its shape is bunched and stout, almost fanged beast-like in posture, with forelimbs that look overbuilt for an animal that lives low to the ground. It moves with a heavy, ape-like confidence, as if it expects the earth to hold still beneath it. That posture is not just style, it is economy. In a region where sand shifts underfoot and grass mats can hide sudden holes, weight distribution matters. A creature that keeps its center low and its front limbs strong can correct itself fast when the ground lies. It can plant, it can brace, it can decide that it will not be pushed around by terrain that keeps trying to move. Its body is wrapped in thick bluish-green scales textured with tubercular bumps and broken by black patterns that grow darker across the back, rear, and hind legs. Underneath, the belly fades into a lighter creamy color, the kind you only catch when it shifts and the shadows change. In the heat haze of midday, those colors can look muted. In the cool of evening, they sharpen again, like the animal is slowly being revealed by changing light. The hide itself is worth lingering on, because it hints at the animal's habits before you ever see it feed. Chatacabra is a glutton, not as a joke, but as a strategy in a place where food comes in bursts. Its skin is described as flabby and elastic, easy to mold. That elasticity makes sense for an animal that eats whenever it can, stretches without tearing, and carries a full belly through long stretches of wandering. Its scales are jagged and especially tough, sturdy enough to become reliable plates, and higher quality scales, taken from individuals that have endured harsher stretches of the plains, are described as even more durable, as if the environment itself has slowly tempered them over time. That detail matters because it suggests a life measured in abrasion. Survival here is not only about avoiding a predator. It is also about enduring the plains long enough to be shaped by them. Then there are the forelimbs, smooth, plated, polished to a shining gleam. Not because Chatacabra is clean, because it licks them constantly. A lifetime of repeated licking strengthens that plating, and constant dragging across grit polishes it like a river polishes glass. Even at a distance, you can catch the behavior. A pause. The head dips, the tongue drags once across the forearm. Not frantic, just routine. That licking is a clue, because for Chatacabra, saliva is not just wetness. It is a stored resource, a tool kept ready, and a tool that needs maintenance. Then you notice the jaw, bulbous, tanned, studded with hard protrusions. Dense plating layered over thick but supple leather. It looks like protective gear that grew into place over generations, built to survive blunt impacts and keep working after them. Inside that jaw is the tongue, long, muscular, quick enough to feel mismatched against the rest of the animal's slow weight. Chatacabra uses that tongue the way many amphibians do, to seize and devour prey with minimal effort. In the plains, their prey is often small and plentiful. Bulachi, wind rustlers, neopterons that hover and skitter and trust speed. It rarely saves them. The tongue is coated in sticky saliva. A brief flick, a quiet slap, an insect vanishes, and the rest of the body barely needs to shift. But in Chatacabra, the tongue is not only a feeding organ. It is part of how the animal fights. That is an interesting distinction, because in the monster hunter world, plenty of amphibians have mouths built for crushing, tusks built for levering, bodies built for swelling or hardening. But Chatacabra is one of the few that makes its tongue an obvious tool of conflict, not just dinner. In a windy desert, that choice makes sense. Wind breaks scent trails. Sand hides footprints. Visibility can be misleading in heat shimmer. A tongue does not need perfect visibility. It only needs to reach. And if you look at the tongue closely, it carries something else. At the tip are soft, prickly taste buds, sensitive enough to test what it is about to eat. The tongue touches first, checks for stimulants, for poisons, for harsh spice, and only then commits. That kind of caution reads as simple intelligence, but it does not need to be. It can be reflex. A body built to reduce mistakes in a place where mistakes cost water, energy, and time. Because for an amphibian in a desert, moisture is always part of the story, even when scales cover the skin. The Windward Plains are open and sun-heavy, and the air can steal water from softer tissue. The eyes, the mouth, the tongue itself. So Chatacabra's roots tend to bend toward damp places, river edges, low ground. Sometimes it even seems to carry moisture with it. When it licks its forelimbs, a sheen of wetness spreads over the plating, and then the shine fades, as if the water is being taken in instead of simply drying. Less like grooming, more like storage. And if that is even partly true, it explains the wide wandering circles, the long stretches out in open air, the unhurried pace, not because it doesn't need water, because it may be managing it. Which brings us to the trick that makes Chatacabra feel so specifically Windward Plains. The saliva does not only feed it, it equips it. Chatacabra's forelimbs can store that sticky mucus within their scutes, holding it in reserve. When it becomes agitated, it rubs its forelimbs across the ground. Stone and ore adhere. Pebbles become plating. Loose rubble becomes knuckles. The range and destructiveness of its blows widen, not because it grows new weapons, but because it borrows the landscape. The plains are full of small, hard things: broken stone, scattered ore, fulgurite fragments left behind like glass teeth. Most animals treat that as hazard. Chatacabra treats it as an option. And that means its most dangerous form is not constant. It is chosen. An escalation it puts on when it wants the conversation to end. One moment, it is an insect eater in the grass. The next, it is a brawler wearing the ground. The overbuilt forelimbs suddenly make sense in a new way. They are not just strong. They are designed to carry extra weight on purpose. A forelimb that is meant to swing with added stone needs reinforcement. A wrist that is meant to take the shock of impact needs plating. An animal that expects its arms to be tools needs posture that puts those tools first. That is why Chatacabra's movement can resemble a gorilla more than a typical toad. Not because it is secretly a fanged beast in disguise, because it has converged on the same solution. When the front half of the body does the work, the body follows a certain shape: a strong shoulder line, a braced chest, a gait that keeps the hands ready. In the plains, that is not just intimidation, it is stability. Chatacabra is also curious in a way that gets it into trouble. It will wander toward oddities: camps, hunters, other monsters, anything unfamiliar enough to draw its attention. It does not like being surprised, and it does not like being crowded. If it decides you are a threat, it answers with the same tools every time. Tongue first, forelimbs second, and the ground itself if it wants to hit harder. There is another small behavior that can look meaningless until you treat the tongue like a tool instead of a habit. Sometimes it licks the ground, not the forelimbs, not prey, the earth itself. The simplest explanation is territory. A quick mark left behind the way many animals leave scent. And that may be part of it. But the places it chooses to lick are often the places with the most residue of life. Scattered fragments, old kills, bone dust worked into sand. It doesn't have to be eating bones outright for that to matter. It may only be sampling them, taking mineral traces the way a herbivore will seek salt, rounding out a diet built mostly on small, soft-bodied prey. A kind of quiet osteophagy. Not dramatic gnawing, but calcium taken in the way the plains offer it. In bits, in dust, in whatever clings when the tongue touches first. And if that idea sounds strange, look at the tongue itself. Along its surface are those barb-like protrusions, almost like a second set of teeth set into muscle. That would make the tongue useful for more than a clean insect snatch. It could rasp, scrape, pull mineral-rich grit from bone or stone. In that light, the tongue is not just a feeding shortcut. It is a multi-tool built for a place where you survive by making the most of whatever is already on the ground. That is why the Sandfolk do not reserve their deepest dread for it, but they do not dismiss it either. Chatacabra is not the top of the plains. It does not rule the windward like a storm does. It does not empty a valley by arriving. Most of the time, it exists lower in the chain. Not harmless, just not worth making a legend out of. And that is part of why it survives. Predators learn to measure risk out here. They learn what is profitable. A quick kill, a clean chase, a meal that does not fight like a stone. Chatacabra offers the opposite. An awkward kind of toughness. A body built to take a hit and make the hit cost you back. It is the kind of target that asks for commitment and then punishes that commitment with bruises and wasted effort. So larger hunters often do what the wind does. They go around it, they push it off a route. They take the cleaner prey and leave the giant toad to its wide, stubborn wandering. This is what it means to sit lower in the food chain, but difficult to remove. Chatacabra does not need to dominate the plains. It only needs to persist inside them, to be present often enough that everything else learns its shape, to be irritating enough that most things choose easier work. And because it has a shelter it can reach, a place with narrow entrances and hard walls, it can afford to be bold in the open. It can afford to investigate. It can afford to get close. Because if the moment turns, it does not need to win the whole plains. It only needs to reach home. That is the quiet power of animals like this. Not apex power, not spectacle, just the kind of stubbornness that becomes part of the landscape. Most bad encounters begin with the same misread. Someone thinks they are safe because they are not being hunted, because the animal looks slow, because the distance feels generous. Then the mouth opens, the body surges forward, and generous turns out to have been a single step too small. And once it has closed distance, the fight becomes about contact, tongue contact, pulling or staggering, forelimb contact, hammering, ground contact, turning loose debris into a longer reach than you planned for. When it is not being bothered, Chatacabra's routine is almost calm. During the plenty, it is often sighted out in the savannah, venturing toward the river's edge to drink and then basking in the sun the way cold-blooded animals always have. If insects hover nearby, the tongue flicks out without the body changing posture. Food comes to it. After it eats enough, it sometimes regurgitates pieces of swallowed bolachi as it continues to roam. Not sickness, just appetite outpacing digestion. In a place full of small lives, even that matters. A spot where it lingered can become briefly interesting to scavengers and opportunists that follow the smallest signals. Eventually, it makes its way to water again, often toward a southern oasis where it drinks slowly or soaks, letting dust loosen and heat bleed away. The oasis is never just water in the plains. It is a meeting point, a soft place in a hard region, a small circle of calm that everything else learns to orbit. Tracks braid the edges. Insects hover low in the reeds and scrub, drawn to dampness the way sparks are drawn to kindling. Even the wind behaves differently here. It still moves, but it moves slower, as if it has to ease itself down before it can cross the surface. Chatacabra uses the oasis the way it uses everything else. Practically, it drinks without haste, lowering that heavy jaw until the waterline touches the leather and the plating, and then it soaks long enough for the tension to leave its body. You can imagine the heat sliding out of the forelimbs first, the arms that do all the work, the plating cooling, the moisture returning to the tongue and the mouth, restoring the one tool it trusts more than any other. If it has been out for a long while, the soak becomes something closer to maintenance than comfort. Water works into seams between scales. Dust lifts away in faint clouds and drifts off downstream. The animal stays still, not because it is lazy, but because stillness is efficient when your goal is recovery. And if something comes too close while it is resting, the response is immediate and simple. A slow head turn, a tongue flick tasting the air, a reminder that even at the oasis, even half submerged, the giant toad is not helpless. Then it returns home. The route back is its own kind of certainty. Chatacabra does not wander forever. It wanders wide, but it wanders with a center. It follows low ridges where the wind is less cruel, cuts through shallow basins where grit settles, and threads between stone outcrops that break up sightlines. A big animal can afford to be seen, but it still prefers not to be bothered on the way to rest. Sometimes you can tell which direction it is headed just by the way it carries its arms. Loose when the day has been easy, heavy when the day has been long. And if the forelimbs are still wearing stones, you can picture it stopping once, somewhere quiet, rubbing the ground again, letting the borrowed armor shed back into the plains. Not because it is giving anything up, because it is done using it, because sleep does not require weight, not to a nest of sticks or a den scraped into sand, but to something more specific, a fulgurite cavern. The entrance is never wide. It does not need to be. A narrow mouth is a promise. Only one problem can come in at a time. The wind that scours the plains loses its teeth at the threshold. The sand stays outside more often than not, and the air inside holds on to dampness longer, as if the cavern is storing a softer version of the world. Fulgurite changes the feeling of stone. It is glass threaded through rock, born from lightning that struck hard enough to melt sand and rewrite it. Even dulled by time, it keeps a sharpness in its edges and a brightness in its seams. When Chatacabra shifts its bulk across the floor, grit slides and taps against that glass, making a faint chime that is almost delicate compared to the animal that causes it. Inside, the giant toad becomes smaller in a way that matters, not in size, but in exposure. The ceiling comes down, the walls close in. The long sight lines of the plains are replaced by short, defensible distances. This is the kind of shelter a creature chooses when it does not want to argue with the world. A place where the wind cannot dry its mouth. A place where the tongue stays useful. A place where an intruder has to commit before it can even be seen. There is something fitting about a creature that borrows stones for armor, choosing a home made of stone, transformed by force. Fulgurite is the plains history, written in glass. Chatacabra lives inside that history, like it belongs there. When it finally settles, it does not sprawl, it tucks. Forelimbs folded close, jaw lowered, weight pressed into the earth until the posture looks almost like a stone that decided to breathe. One last slow lick across the plating, and then stillness. And inside that shelter, the world outside can do what it likes. Wind can rise, sand can shift, the grass can flatten and spring back. The giant toad does not need to argue with any of it while it rests. Chatacabra can hold territory without being an apex for a simple reason. It is not an easy meal. Thick elastic hide, tough scales, a dense jaw built for impact, forelimbs that can turn rubble into armor and widen the reach of a punch. Most smart predators would rather spend energy on prey that does not hit back like a stone mallet. So it becomes a stubborn constant, roaming broadly, rarely fighting its own kind, and throwing its weight around when necessary. Everything about Chatacabra is built around making impulsive feeding survivable. Eat quickly, test first, stretch without tearing, hit hard when crowded, rest where the entrances are narrow. It is hard not to think of another frog-like bruiser when you watch it work. Chatacabra. It is tempting to treat Chatacabra as a direct echo, but the difference is the point. Chatacabra is defined by tusks and excavation, by lifting and carrying boulders with the mouth, by moving stone through brute digging and jaw strength. Chatacabra does not need tusks to reshape a fight. It uses adhesion. It uses stored saliva. It wears the ground instead of uprooting it. Both are amphibians that interact with rock, but in opposite directions. Chatacabra makes stone move. Chatacabra makes stone stay attached and heavy on its arms. And in the Windward Plains, that makes sense. The ground is always offering fragments, and the wind is always trying to scatter them. An animal that can turn loose debris into protection can stay confident in a region that constantly strips things down. If you want to picture it now, keep it simple. A warm stretch of ground near the river, late in the plenty, when the air is clearer and the wind is gentle enough to feel like breath instead of pressure. A bulky shape at the water's edge, bluish-green hide broken by dark stripes, forelimbs resting heavy in the sand, a jaw lowered, studded and thick, a tongue flicking out once, twice, catching insects you did not notice. then the slow turn as evening cools the ground. Not fear, just routine. A remembered route back toward glass-lined shelter. Wind through grass, grit shifting on the dunes, distant calls rising and fading again. If you are listening in bed, let it be a small story tonight. Not an apex, not a calamity, just one of the Windward Plains' stubborn residents, living off insects, sunlight, and whatever stones the ground is willing to lend. Let it keep roaming out there. Let it soak when it finds water. Let it sleep inside the quiet of its fulgurite cavern when the night cools the sand. Good night, hunter.